What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as Hamhocks42 on the internet, and today I want to talk about Omarthis Ghostfire Initiate. This is an interesting card that is going to be included in the Eldrazi pre-con deck that has a mountain of a text box, so let's dive right on into it. So this legendary creature, Spirit Naga, is a 0/0 for XX. Omarthis Ghostfire Initiate enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever you put one or more +1/+1 counters on another colorless creature, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Omarthis. When Omarthis dies, manifest a number of cards from the top of your library equal to the number of counters on it. So there's a lot to unpack with this thing. On its face, it's a 0/0 that enters with +1/+1 counters. We've seen these all over the place, and in this case, the casting cost is XX. This is not new territory, honestly. This is shockingly like Hangarback Walker, actually, is a card that immediately sprung to mind when I first read this. Because Hangarback Walker has, it's a 0/0, in this case an artifact, construct, for XX. It enters the battlefield with X counters, and when it dies, you create Thopters. And so what we're doing something very similar here, because when we're manifesting with Omarthis, when Omarthis dies, we're creating colorless 2/2 creatures out of the cards in our library. So, all right, neat. It's a similar effect. Like, the bigger Omarthis gets, the more creatures you get when they die. So that's kind of handy. It has kind of a cool effect. And you can even trigger it with, like, sacrifice triggers and things like that. So it's not a bad card, honestly. Bottom line, it is effective at what it does if you are in a deck that has a lot of colorless creatures, such as Hangarback Walker, because if you have a lot of colorless creatures and a lot of counter synergies, is really where this is going to come into play. That's where this is going to be most helpful. So Hangarback Walker, actually, not only is this card similar to it, but it synergizes with it. Because Omarthis gets a +1/+1 counter every time you put a +1/+1 counter on another creature, cards like Hangarback Walker, all of a sudden, they enter with +1/+1 counters on them, and they are recognized as getting the counters and would trigger Omarthis. So if I have a 1/1 Omarthis down, let's say I drop a Hangarback Walker, I invest a total of 4 mana, so X equals 2. Hangarback Walker enters with 2 counters on it. Well, Omarthis sees whenever I put 1 or more +1/+1 counters, oh, okay, I may put a +1/+1 counter on Omarthis. So because I cast the Hangarback Walker, I get 1 counter on Omarthis. Now, that it doesn't care how many counters you're putting on that creature. It cares how many instances of counters are being placed on that creature. So be aware of that. So every time you put a Hangarback Walker down, or a Walking Ballista down, or a Triskelion down, or a Stonecoil Serpent down, any of these colorless counter-generating creatures, as you're putting them down or as you are putting counters on them, Omarthis will grow. Just over time, Omarthis will just get large, which is pretty darn handy. And then once it dies, you manifest. Now, you may be wondering, what the heck is manifest? Like, and for many people, this is the first time you've heard that word. It is not a common keyword or mechanic, and it is far from evergreen. Manifest is a mechanic that was introduced in Fate Reforged, which was part of the Tarkir block, and it is, so it was introduced like 10 plus years ago, and it was only included in one set, and so as a result, it is very, very narrow. The way that Manifest works, and honestly, there's one card that sees like significant play that has Manifest on it. If it wasn't for this one card, Manifest would have faded into history alongside things like Banding and Shadow, although Wizards is bringing those things back too. But regardless, the way that Manifest works, and the card I'm going to cite, by the way, is Reality Shift. This sees a decent amount of play in Commander because it is good hard removal in blue. And I'm noticing my hair is going all over the place as we record this, but hey, this is unedited. It's what we're doing, baby. Anyway, Reality Shift is an instant for 1 and a blue. Exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. And when they're manifesting the top card of their library, what that does is it takes the top card of their library and it puts it onto the battlefield face down. The controller of that does look at it on the way down. They do get to know what it is, and they can flip it face up for its mana cost if it's a creature card. So as a result, like if they manifest something that isn't a creature, if they manifest a land or an instant or sorcery, it's just a 2/2. They just have a vanilla 2/2 creature. That's it. If they do get some kind of benefit, then great, they can go nuts. Now, if you have a morph creature, under a manifest. You can flip it face up for its morph cost, and you can get its effect. So that's something where you can have a lot of fun. So let's take, for example, Willbender here. Willbender is one of the most beloved morph creatures, and with good reason. This thing's a house. Normally, when you have Willbender, you would pay 3 mana, put it face down as a 2/2. Your opponents don't get to know what it is, but you do. And you can pay 1 and a blue to flip it face up. When Willbender is turned face up, change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. So in this case, you have a triggered ability upon being turned face up. If Willbender gets manifest, you have a face down Willbender live, locked and loaded, ready to go. So if I were to build Omarthis Ghostfire Initiate into a commander deck, I want to make sure that I have a handful of options, a handful of items at my disposal. One, I want a decent amount of ramp because I want this thing to be able to enter the battlefield as a 3/3 or 4/4 somewhat consistently. I also want a lot of colorless +1/+1 counter creatures. You know, we mentioned Hangarback Walker. Walking Ballista actually works really well with it because you can just dump excess mana into putting counters on Walking Ballista, and as you're putting counters on Walking Ballista, you are also putting counters on Omarthis. I'm also looking at cards like the Ozolith, Stonecoil Serpent, other tools that can get colorless creatures counters. Like even things like Iron Apprentice, which are otherwise very lackluster creatures, synergize with this in exactly the way that we want. So cool, I want that in here. I also am very interested in sacrifice outlets. Things like Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, those kinds of things that could also fit in a colorless deck like this and give me opportunities to sacrifice Omarthis at will, pop it and get those manifests, and then once I have them manifest, be able to flip them face up and potentially get some value, assuming some of them are flipped face up or are worthy of being turned face up. That said, honestly, turning them face up isn't even that important. It's really not. Like, because at the end of the day, when this thing dies, for every counter on it, you get a 2/2 creature that has some additional upside potentially. But just the 2/2 creature is enough to flood the board with value. So in essence, you might also want to run just straight up destroy board wipes. Hit a Wrath of God with an Omarthis and a Walking Ballista on the field, then all of a sudden, all of your opponents are left with nothing, and you've just sprouted a fresh army that looks a little different than what it did before, but you went from a couple of big dudes to a ton of tiny dudes. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do a lot of good stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of my thought process around Omarthis. If I were to build Omarthis as a commander, those are the pieces that I would want to make sure we have dialed in, locked and loaded, and ready to go. The other cool thing, if you have Omarthis as your commander, being able to crack Omarthis multiple times in a game could be really, really fun. Now, if Omarthis is your commander, you are limited to colorless, so that changes what you can do a lot. Oh, I'm also realizing, in those kinds of decks, you really want to have a lot of artifacts. You know, a lot of the previous ones we mentioned, the Stonecoils, the Walking Ballistas, they're all artifact creatures. Well, you get a little keyboard ASMR there as I pull up a card that I think is highly underrated and would fit this deck like an absolute glove, and that is Steel Overseer. So Steel Overseer is a 1/1 for 2 tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. And if I'm not mistaken, if you have multiple artifact creatures, and Steel Overseer puts a counter on itself, by the way, too. So if you have another 2 artifact creatures alongside Steel Overseer, you tap it, you put 1 counter on 3 separate creatures. Omarthis sees you put 3 counters on colorless creatures. Have fun with that. That's going to be pretty fantastic, in my opinion. So that could get out of hand very, very fast. You could also add cards that are modular. You know, like Arcbound Ravager comes to mind. So this actually checks a whole bunch of boxes. So Arcbound Ravager is a 2/2 for 0, or it's a 0/0 rather for 2, with modular 1, meaning it enters the battlefield with 1 counter on it. When you cast it, it triggers Omarthis because it is a colorless creature getting a counter. You can sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. So if you have other artifacts lying around that can be sacrificed, boom, Arcbound Ravager can just eat those up, get counters. Omarthis is getting counters in the process. Life is good. Now, the one thing you don't get with Arcbound Ravager alongside Omarthis, you don't get a sack outlet for Omarthis themselves, because the Arcbound Ravager specifically states that it needs to be an artifact. You can't just sacrifice a creature, and Omarthis notably is not an artifact. So be aware of that. That's a little, like, it's not quite a non-bow, but it's just not a perfect synergy the way that it seems like it could be on paper, or at least at first glance. So be aware of that. But in general, honestly, go to Scryfall or your card database of choice and do a keyword search for Arcbound. You will find a whole series of modular creatures that would go beautifully with Omarthis. And honestly, any opportunity to play modular is great by me. Those cards have some very cool interplay and are very weird. One of the other cool things about the Arcbound series, when you have a creature with modular, if they have counters on them when they die, you can move those counters to another artifact creature. Again, note, you can't put them on Omarthis, but if you have any other artifact creatures lying around, you can move them to that creature, and Omarthis will see those counters be added, trigger, get another counter. So the amount of synergy that you get there is kind of insane, and I kind of love it. So I feel like some kind of artifact creature counter strategy is really where this card wants to be. And it's funny that it's included in the Eldrazi deck. As of this recording, I haven't really poured over that particular deck list, but it doesn't really look like that's the strategy in that deck at all. This is like an alternate commander option. And from what I saw, it looks primarily like gigantic Eldrazi monsters, which is great. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But this looks like it's trying to fit into a synergy and trying to fit into a style that deck doesn't necessarily do. Although, to be fair, whenever you're playing Eldrazi, you got to be able to drop 10, 12 drops very consistently. And as a result, you need to ramp to the moon. So if you're ramping to the moon, Omarthis can get some decent value, even if you don't get any other synergies. But still, yeah, I feel like you can really take this card to the next level by surrounding it with those pieces. So that's just my thought. That's how I want to approach it. The other thing you can do is, add things that can modify morph. Honestly, look up, do a search for face down or morph in those various on Scryfall and whatnot, and you can find some very interesting stuff. So a lot of them are colored, unfortunately. Like there are cards. There's one actually, I believe. I'm gonna pull it up in a separate window because I'm gonna make a fool of myself if I don't. Yeah, there's some cards that are genuinely very, very bad. I believe it's called Break Open, or it's not Crack Open. I just looked that up. But there are cards that allow you to just turn cards face up, like turn face down creatures face up. Like, that's the thing. And they're usually from Onslaught, and most of them suck. But they could do some pretty neat, crazy things. Yeah, the card I'm thinking of is called Break Open. So let me pull that up there. Yeah, for 1 and a red, instant, turn target face down creature. Oh, and opponent controls face up. Never mind, that's terrible. That doesn't fit at all. It still doesn't fit. We're trying to find a weird, janky, goofy workaround, and it's still terrible. Anyway, doggone it. Thanks, Memory Bank, for remembering that card exists. And thank you, card, for reminding me why you're so forgettable. All right. So thank you so much for tuning in. This has been kind of my deep dive on Omarthis, Ghostfire Initiate. I'm very interested in this card. I think it has a lot of fun potential. And if you enjoyed this show is available as a podcast in audio form, in addition to on YouTube, called Overthinking MTG. Please drop a sub, follow, whatever it's called on your application of choice. It would mean the world. I really appreciate it. So in the meantime, stay good to each other. I'll catch you on the next one.